Layla, why don't you show us what you've got? The challenge dripped from Mr. Miles's voice, more accusation than invitation, as the class fell silent and 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the quiet girl in the back. No one expected what happened next, least of all the man who thought he could make her stumble. Layla Thompson felt the weight of her violin case pressing against her shoulder as she stepped off the yellow school bus, her sneakers crunching softly against the pavement outside Eastbrook Middle School. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, the kind where the North Carolina air still carried hints of summer heat even though the leaves had started to crisp. The school stood like a brick fortress against the morning haze, and students were already pouring in through the double doors, laughing, shouting, checking their phones. Layla walked with purpose but not speed, her head slightly down, her curls tied back in a loose ponytail that brushed against her backpack. At 13, she was already an expert in blending in. Atlanta had taught her that. When you're the quiet new girl, when you're black in a mostly white school, when you carry an old violin case and don't say much, people tend to form opinions long before they ask questions. That was fine with Layla. She didn't come here to impress anyone. She came to make it through the year, to keep her head down, to make her grandmother proud, even if she wasn't around anymore to see it. Her mom had dropped her off at the bus stop that morning with a quick kiss on the forehead and a quiet, "Just be yourself, baby." But Layla had learned that being herself was often the very thing that made people uncomfortable. So she stuck with silence. Silence was safe. Silence couldn't be misquoted. The school building buzzed with morning chaos, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, teachers ushering kids along like herding cats. She made it to the front office and picked up her schedule without much fanfare. No one asked her name twice. No one looked her in the eye. She was just another file in a sea of paper. Her locker was down B Hall, not too far from the music wing. That, at least, gave her a sliver of comfort. Her last class of the day was Orchestra 7, Room 108. That was the only class she'd allowed herself to feel anything about. Everything else, math, social studies, homeroom, was background noise. The real music happened when she opened that old violin case, the one with her grandmother's faded initials carved near the latch. Layla's grandmother had raised her while her mom worked 2 nursing shifts back in Atlanta, and that woman's hands, weathered, strong, always warm, had guided Layla's fingers on the strings before she even knew what keys were. That violin wasn't just an instrument. It was her anchor, her inheritance, her memory stitched into mahogany and horsehair. She didn't play to show off. She played to breathe. Room 108 smelled like rosin and dust and ambition. The orchestra room was bigger than she expected, with metal chairs arranged in semicircles and music stands already cluttered with pencil-marked sheets. A few students were tuning their instruments when she walked in, all of them chatting like this was their second home. She found an empty chair near the back and quietly placed her violin case on the floor. No one said hello. No one really noticed. Until he walked in. Gregory Miles. The man who was supposed to be her orchestra director. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, wearing a corduroy jacket with elbow patches like he was auditioning for a movie about bitter music professors. He had a voice like sandpaper and a way of entering a room like he expected it to already be silent. "All right, settle," he said, barely looking up as he dropped a stack of music folders onto his desk. "We've got a new one today." The room quieted, and Layla felt 20 pairs of eyes land on her like searchlights. "Name?" he asked, still not looking directly at her. "Layla Thompson," she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake, but it didn't rise either. Mr. Miles finally glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Thompson. Back row's fine. We'll see what you can do." And that was it. No welcome, no introductions. Just an announcement, like someone had wheeled in a new music stand. She nodded once and stayed where she was. Over the next week, Layla barely played more than a whisper during rehearsals. She followed every note, every cue, but she never let the full force of her talent show. She didn't want eyes on her. She didn't want to stand out. But still, people noticed. One girl, tall, blonde, first-chair violin, kept side-eyeing her whenever Layla adjusted her posture or double-checked her bowing technique. A few boys joked about her baby violin, not realizing it was a full-size classic model older than any of them. Mr. Miles, for the most part, ignored her. He had favorites, and he made that clear. He praised Maddie after every piece, gave extra attention to the percussion kids whose parents probably donated to the school arts fund, and reserved his sharpest sarcasm for those he thought were wasting his time. Layla didn't fall into either category, and maybe that's what bothered him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't seek approval. She just played. And played well. By the second week, the whispering started. A boy in cello muttered to his friend, "I swear she's better than half the front row." A girl behind her said, "She never messes up, even during the runs." Still, Layla kept her head down. But Mr. Miles didn't like mysteries in his classroom. He didn't like things he couldn't control. And so one afternoon, when the class was working through a Vivaldi ensemble, he stopped mid-measure. "Thompson," he said, his voice louder than usual. Layla froze, bow still mid-air. "You've been quiet," he continued. "Too quiet." A few students chuckled. Layla didn't blink. "I think it's time we see what you've got." His tone wasn't encouraging. It was dismissive, like he was setting her up to fail. "Come on," he gestured, stepping aside. "The floor's yours." The room held its breath. Layla stood slowly, picked up her violin, and walked to the front. Her palms didn't sweat. Her heart didn't race. She had been here before, on small stages in community centers, and church halls with wooden floors, and her grandmother's living room on Sunday evenings. She raised the violin to her chin, closed her eyes for a single breath, and played. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was precise. It was alive. A haunting passage from a lesser-known Elgar piece, one she'd practiced for years in silence. The bow moved like water, her fingers dancing with muscle memory born from heartbreak and healing. The room changed. The sound transformed the walls, quieted the whispers, slowed the clocks. Even Mr. Miles didn't speak. His arms were crossed, jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't expected this. No one had. When she stopped, there was no applause. Just silence. Heavy, loaded silence. Layla nodded once, walked back to her chair, and sat down. Her bow hand was steady. Her breathing calm. And in that silence, something shifted. Not just in the room. In the way they saw her. In the way she was no longer invisible. Mr. Miles didn't say a word for the rest of the period. And when the bell rang, students filed out slower than usual. Layla packed up her violin case with the same care she always did. But as she walked down the hallway, something felt different. Not better. Not safer. Just changed. The next day, the air inside room 108 felt different. Not louder. Not tenser. Just loaded, like everyone knew something had shifted, but no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Layla Thompson walked in quietly like she always did, violin case in hand, curls pulled back, her black Converse squeaking faintly against the linoleum floor. But this time, heads turned, not sharply, not dramatically, but just enough to say, "We saw what you did." Even the girl in first chair, Maddie Cooper, who usually sat like she owned the room, looked over her shoulder for half a second longer than necessary before turning back around and adjusting her bow. Layla didn't meet any of their eyes. She didn't need to. She already felt the weight of their attention clinging to her like humidity in August. She sat in the same seat as yesterday, far back but not hidden, and gently placed her violin case down, her fingers brushing the initials carved into the leather like a quiet prayer. Mr. Miles walked in 3 minutes late, coffee in hand, expression unreadable. He didn't say a word at first. Just set his cup on the edge of the music stand, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt like they mattered more than the 20 pairs of eyes watching him, and finally looked at the class. "Yesterday was unexpected," he said flatly, not looking in Layla's direction. "Let's see if we can focus today." He handed out sheet music, a more technical, aggressive piece with shifting time signatures and difficult transitions, the kind that makes most middle schoolers fumble and squint. Layla read it once and already recognized the setup. This wasn't just any practice. It was a test, aimed squarely at her. They rehearsed in groups, first violins, second violins, violas, cellos, but when it came time to bring the ensemble together, Mr. Miles paused. "Let's have Layla start us off," he said, flipping a page with exaggerated casualness. His tone didn't rise. His posture didn't shift. But everyone felt it. A few students shot glances her way. One boy let out a quiet dang under his breath. Layla didn't flinch. She stood, adjusted her posture, and played. Clean. Controlled. Sharp in all the places it needed to be, fluid in the ones that asked for grace. And when she hit the toughest measure, the one most of the class had barely managed even with pencil markings and whispered counts, she didn't pause. She moved through it like it had always lived inside her. Mr. Miles didn't say anything when she finished. He just motioned for the rest of the class to join in. But his lips were tight, his hands clenched, and he didn't once look her in the eye. It wasn't long before the whispers returned, not the cruel kind, not the jeering kind, just the kind that circle genius when it doesn't come with a permission slip. "She plays like a senior," someone muttered one day. "Bet she's been in competitions or something." Maddie started arriving earlier, sitting straighter, asking more questions. A few students who'd never spoken to Layla before began nodding at her in the hallway or during lunch, like acknowledging her might pull them into orbit. But for Mr. Miles, the energy shifted in the opposite direction. His sarcasm got sharper. His instructions shorter. And one afternoon, as they practiced a new arrangement of a Mozart piece, he stopped mid-session and said, "Layla, you're taking this solo. Let's see if lightning strikes twice." His voice carried that same edge he'd used the first time, the one wrapped in faux encouragement but lined with something colder. Layla stood again. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just played. And it was better. More alive. She added just enough soul to the structure, just enough breath between the measures to make the notes feel like thoughts instead of instructions. When she finished, the room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. But Mr. Miles nodded once and said, "You memorize fast." "That's good, though we'll see if you can keep up with the rest of the group." The weeks passed, and Layla's name started appearing on rehearsal schedules in pencil, solos, small group leads, but never mentioned aloud by Mr. Miles. His praise, when it came, was clinical. And then one day, it happened. The slip. The moment. They were rehearsing for the winter recital, something formal with district judges invited. Layla had just wrapped another flawless run-through of a technically demanding passage. The room was still settling when Mr. Miles said, under his breath but loud enough to echo, "Shame the conservatory types don't usually look like that." The words landed like a slap in the dead silence. A few students blinked. A few sat perfectly still. Maddie glanced sideways. Even the most indifferent players looked up from their stands. Layla didn't move. She didn't frown. She didn't even blink. She calmly lowered her bow, walked back to her seat, and sat down. Not a single student laughed. No one cracked a joke. And Mr. Miles, suddenly aware of the room's stillness, turned his back and began shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. That afternoon, she was called to the principal's office. "Mr. Miles feels your attitude has been disruptive," Principal Reed said, steepling her fingers like she was trying to keep the conversation polite. "He said you've undermined his authority." Layla sat upright, hands folded in her lap. "I've only played when he asked me to," she replied evenly. Principal Reed nodded slowly, not meeting her eyes. "Still, we don't want tension in the classroom." Layla didn't argue. She didn't pull out names or accusations. She simply asked if there were any community music programs nearby. "I just want to play," she said. Something about her tone made Principal Reed pause. 2 days later, The school counselor handed her a flyer for the Charlotte Youth Ensemble, a citywide music group known for nurturing raw talent regardless of background. "You'd have to audition," the counselor said. Layla just nodded, quietly taking the paper. Word travels fast in middle school. By the following week, students were whispering again, but this time it wasn't about talent. It was about the meeting, the office, the accusations. Some students began shifting closer to Layla in rehearsal. Others distanced themselves. Maddie sat in silence more often. Mr. Miles acted like nothing had happened. He taught the way he always did, dry, cold, calculated. But the tension in room 108 was undeniable. You could feel it in the way no one laughed at his jokes anymore. In the way even his favorites hesitated before raising their hands. And then, the flyer. One morning, someone spotted it in Layla's binder, a copy of the Charlotte Youth Ensemble's spring concert schedule, with a bold red circle around the date marked Soloist Showcase. By lunch, the entire music wing knew. Layla Thompson had been invited to perform. Solo. Downtown. On a real stage. No one said it, but everyone understood what that meant. It wasn't just a performance. It was an escape route. A statement. A way of saying, "I don't need your approval to be great." Mr. Miles never mentioned it. Never congratulated her. Never even asked how she got the audition. But 2 days after the whispers started, he submitted a formal complaint about her disruptive energy to the administration. That afternoon, Layla walked past his office on her way to the parking lot, her violin strapped across her back, the spring sun casting long shadows on the tile. Inside, she could hear his voice, calm, composed, insisting. "She's not a team player. She doesn't respect structure. This isn't about talent, it's about attitude." Layla didn't stop walking. She didn't flinch. Because by now, she understood exactly what he meant. And more importantly, she understood exactly who she was. By the time March rolled around, the name Layla Thompson was no longer just a footnote in the music wing, it was a quiet anthem. You didn't hear it shouted or chanted, but you felt it in the way students lingered when she tuned her strings, in the way other teachers paused in the hallway when she passed, nodding in a way that said, "We've heard." The spring concert flyer went up on the main hallway bulletin board in fresh color print, Charlotte Youth Ensemble, Spring Soloist Showcase, April 22nd, and right underneath, in small but undeniable font, featured soloist, Layla Thompson, violin. The buzz moved fast. In the cafeteria. In gym locker rooms. On group chats. "She's really playing downtown? Is that like, for real? I heard judges come to that thing from conservatories." But Layla kept her rhythm, quiet and grounded. She still sat in the same seat in room 108, still packed up her violin with care, still didn't speak unless she had to. Mr. Miles, on the other hand, barely acknowledged her now. Ever since the principal's office had grown crowded with staff and students quietly siding against his accusations, the man had shifted into something colder than silence. He didn't critique her. He didn't praise her. He didn't even use her name. But that didn't stop the room from watching her, and it didn't stop her from playing. The school's equity board had been formed quietly, but news of a student-led forum had spread faster than any announcement. Scheduled for the week before the concert, it was designed as an open dialogue on fairness, respect, and belonging in Eastbrook classrooms. No names were listed. But no one needed them. Everyone knew why it was happening. Everyone knew who it was about. Layla debated not going. She didn't crave a microphone. She didn't want to be seen as the girl who caused trouble. But something in her shifted when she saw one of the flyers posted outside the music room, right next to a blown-up photo of Eastbrook's orchestra at last year's concert. None of the faces in that picture looked like hers. So on a warm Thursday afternoon, she walked into the library where the forum was held, violin case in hand, hair braided neatly, and heart steady. The room was packed. Students, teachers, even a few parents sat in folding chairs in front of a small panel. A counselor spoke first. Then a student council member. They talked about inclusion, about the importance of being seen. Some of it felt rehearsed. But when a tall 8th grader named Mariah stood up and said, "There are teachers here who only see you if your last name is printed on a donor wall," the air changed. Then someone asked the question, gentle, careful, but pointed, "Would the student this conversation centers around like to say something?" All heads turned. And Layla, heart-pounding but voice clear, stood up. She didn't walk to the front. She didn't take the mic. She just stood and said, "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to play music." But when people tell you with their eyes, or with their words, that you don't belong, even when you know you do, it changes how you breathe in a room. It changes how you sit, how you speak. I've been told I don't fit the type. I've been told I'm too quiet. But I've never been told I wasn't good until someone needed a reason to push me down. Her voice didn't shake. Her hand stayed still. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to be heard. The room was silent. One teacher wiped her glasses. A boy near the back clapped once, then stopped, unsure. But the message had landed. The soil had shifted. Days passed quickly after that. Layla spent her evenings practicing in the living room with the ceiling fan spinning softly above her, the ghost of her grandmother's voice still somewhere in the corners. The music she chose wasn't flashy. It was a piece her grandmother used to hum while cooking, a composition by Florence Price that wrapped sorrow and hope into every bar. Her bow moved with memory, with muscle, with something older than sheet music. On the morning of the showcase, she barely spoke during breakfast. Her mom didn't press. Just left a note on the counter next to a cup of tea, "Play like no one ever told you not to." At the Charlotte Arts Center, the auditorium lights were dimmed, the stage polished to a shine. The audience filled in slowly, parents, musicians, students from other schools. A few teachers from Eastbrook were spotted in the back row. Even Maddie showed up, sitting awkwardly next to 2 other girls from orchestra, fidgeting with her sleeves. But no one said a word. They were waiting. Layla walked onto the stage in a navy dress and black flats, her violin in one hand and the bow in the other. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply bowed once and lifted her instrument. The first note hung in the air like a breath that dared not be exhaled. Then another. Then a cascade of sounds so pure, so deeply personal, that it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like prayer. Like memory. Like resistance wrapped in melody. The room didn't move. Even the coughs and fidgets stopped. The music built and softened, rose and fell like a tide, and when it ended, there was a heartbeat of silence before the applause came. First one clap. Then more. Then a wave. Some stood. A few wiped their eyes. It wasn't just appreciation, it was awe. Backstage, the ensemble director clapped her gently on the shoulder. "You didn't just play the piece," she whispered, "you became it." Layla smiled, small but real. As they filed out into the lobby, several students from other schools asked for her name. One even asked if she gave lessons. Maddie approached her cautiously and said, I didn't know you could play like that." Layla didn't reply right away. Then she said, "Now you do." That was enough. The next day at Eastbrook, everything felt quieter. Not tense. Not awkward. Just quieter. Like the building itself had heard the performance and didn't quite know how to respond. Principal Reed made a brief announcement over the intercom congratulating our own Layla Thompson for her outstanding solo at the Charlotte Youth Showcase. Mr. Miles didn't say a word. But by the end of the week, it was quietly announced that he'd be stepping down as head of the music program to focus on curriculum development. No press release. No parade. Just absence. And maybe that was enough. Layla didn't need revenge. She didn't need a public apology. She had made her case in sound, not in arguments. In skill, not in shouting. In presence. Her story wasn't just about talent. It was about truth. About how you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. about how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up, violin in hand, heart on sleeve, and let the music speak. That Friday, as students filed into room 108 for rehearsal, a new substitute conductor stood at the podium. He introduced himself kindly, asked them to warm up. When he got to Layla, he smiled and said, "I've heard a lot about you. Mind leading us in tuning?" She nodded and stood, bow in hand, shoulders square, eyes steady. And this time, when she played the first note, the room was already listening. As the author of Layla Thompson's story, I want to leave you with more than just a narrative. I want to leave you with a truth that echoes beyond the final note of her violin. This story wasn't just about a girl in a classroom. It was about how dignity, perseverance, and quiet strength can change the way a room listens. Layla never raised her voice. She never fought back with anger. And yet, she dismantled prejudice and earned respect, not by trying to be louder than those who doubted her, but by being undeniably herself. In life, there will be people who try to define your worth by how you look, how you speak, or where you come from. There will be those who don't believe you belong in the spaces you've worked hard to reach. When that happens, remember Layla. Remember that you don't have to conform to expectations or fight with fury to prove your value. Sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is show up, do what you do best, and let your work speak for you. Your voice doesn't always need to come from your mouth. It can come from your art, your kindness, your actions, your courage. This story is also a reminder that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. The students who once stayed quiet eventually stood up. The teachers who once turned away started to see. Change doesn't always come from confrontation. It often starts with awareness, with truth, with listening. To anyone who has ever felt invisible in a classroom, in a meeting, in a space where you knew you deserved to be seen, you are not alone. And your presence, even in silence, can be powerful. Keep showing up. Keep creating. Keep holding your head high. Let the world adjust to your brilliance. On behalf of our channel, US Instructive Stories, thank you for listening to Layla's journey. We hope it sparked reflection, inspired strength, and reminded you that resilience isn't always loud, it's consistent. If her story touched your heart, please consider sharing it. And if you see someone like Layla in your own life, someone quietly carrying greatness, take the time to notice them, to support them, and to stand beside them. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never underestimate the power of your own voice, even when it's spoken through a violin.